Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today we are once again going forward with another team here in our early off-season preview, addressing a couple of sort of issues or points of contention with every team in the league as we get ready for the start of the free agency period and really sort of getting into the heart of the off-season. So, today, we are looking at the Dallas Mavericks, a team with quite a few questions that they need to answer. So, we are going to dive right into it. We'll throw some stats up on the screen for you right now. The Mavericks end the regular season with a record of 38 and 44. They finish 11th in the Western Conference, 3rd in the Southwest Division, and miss the playoffs after kind of sort of packing it in and quitting in the last stages of the season. They were hoping to kind of pick or keep their draft pick, and they did succeed in doing that, but it also meant that they kind of shut it down in the last week or two of the campaign. But in terms of the stats, taking a look at what they've got here, they had one of the better offenses in the league, 6th overall by offensive rating, but their defense was pretty terrible. They were 24th in the league by defensive rating. That puts their net rating at 19th. They played with the 28th highest pace in the league and had the 5th highest payroll. So that's never quite a contrast that you want to see, being in the lower half of the net and defensive ratings, but still shelling out a pretty substantial amount of money. So that is one of the issues that face the Mavs here. We'll take a look, though, before we dive into the questions, some of the additions and losses for this team, because there are a couple that we need to look at here. In terms of additions, it was a couple of draft picks and a traded player. They get Derek Lively the second in the draft. They also get Olivier Maxence Prosper in a draft day trade that gets them the rights to draft him. So technically it's a trade, but it's also him joining via the draft. But they get those two with their draft picks. They also get Richaun Holmes sent over from Sacramento. From Sacramento in one of those trades. And in terms of losses for the Mavericks, they're able to move the contract of Davis Bertans. So not too bad here. Bertans' contract was not massive, but they weren't really doing a whole lot with him. He wasn't really seeing all that much time, so they move him, they get some young players, and the Mavs move forward. But speaking of moving forward, that gets us into our first question here for the Mavs, and it's one that really everything else relies upon. That question being, do the Dallas Mavericks keep Kyrie Irving? Now, as I said, the answer to this obviously determines the entire trajectory of the Mavs moving forward, not just for this upcoming season, but potentially for the years beyond it as well, right? If Kyrie is going to sign a multi-year deal, then that really does kind of impact the way that you're planning with this team for those couple of years. The team made a pretty big move to trade for Kyrie Irving in the first place, and then kind of pulled the plug late in the season, presumably for the sake of keeping their draft pick this year, which they did, and turned into a pick or two. But the question now is, can Kyrie be convinced that this current roster headed by himself and by Luka Doncic is enough to truly compete over the course of a full season, right? And that is an aspect of this situation that I think is getting lost a bit, the way a lot of people are talking about it. The Kyrie Irving Luka Doncic duo would theoretically have a full season to play together instead of the 20 game little slice that we did see from them in a scenario where the Mavs were already trying to dig themselves out of a little bit of a hole from their kind of rough play before they made the trade at all. So there is all sorts of rumors, all sorts of speculation about where Kyrie could be going or what scenario he best fits in, what team sort of has the money or the assets to entice him to join. But I wouldn't discount the potential that he simply returns to the Mavs, right? Despite the occasional controversy that Kyrie Irving kind of courts off of the court, if he confirms to the Mavs that he wants in, that he wants to re-sign there, they'd be hard-pressed to turn him down, right? At the end of the day, if we're looking at it from just a basketball perspective, it's hard to imagine a scenario where Kyrie Irving does not help your roster. So we'll have to see. The Mavs certainly seem to be indicating, right, that they want to keep him. So it'll come down to what Kyrie decides for his future. But that leads us into point number 2 here for Dallas. That point is, with or without Kyrie, this team needs to play better defense. The Mavs were one of the worst defenses in the league last season. We mentioned at the top, 24th in the league by defensive rating. Those defensive woes were pretty blatantly apparent after the Kyrie trade, after they sent away guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, who were ever so slightly propping up their defensive numbers. So they were pretty bad. The team was dead last in rebounding, despite the best efforts of guys like Christian Wood and Luka Doncic, who combined to average 15.9 rebounds per game. They were still last on that front. They were 29th in steals and blocks, I believe. I think it might be 29th and 28th. I'll double check that in editing. But they were among the worst teams in the league in steals and blocks. If you're looking for some good news for the Mavericks, the good news is that they were among the best teams in the league in terms of turnovers. So they didn't commit a crazy amount. However, their defense didn't really force many turnovers either. They were sitting in the bottom third of the league in that category. So, you weren't turning the ball over, but you weren't getting too many points off of turnovers either because your defense wasn't forcing any. Basically, the Mavs defense just kind of went through the motions for the most part, and the Mavs relied on a star-studded offense to carry them through. They relied on Luka going out and putting up crazy stats, and then in the back end of the season, Kyrie Irving shows up and they start relying on him to go out and score in bunches as well. The problem is that didn't really happen. The Mavs ended the season with a point per game differential of 0.1. Now, that is 0.1 in their favor, but that's not really enough of a difference for you to be consistently winning games just off the basis of your offensive performance. Now, that 0.1 number is honestly hilarious, but you also have to take into account Kyrie was only there for 20 games. A lot of the point differential that was negative for the Mavs sort of came before he had arrived, and he did as much as he could to try and get it back to a positive number. But it's still a concern for the Mavs moving forward. They need to play some better defense because the offense was very, very good, right? They had a top 10 offense in the league, and it still wasn't really enough for them to win games because the defense was that bad. Now, they did address some of those concerns in the draft, right? They got guys like Derek Lively, Olivier Maxence Prosper, Rashawn Holmes, all guys who might be able to bolster their interior defense a little bit, right? That's assuming that they're ready to go right away. Not Holmes. He's not a rookie. He has a little bit more experience, but Maxence Prosper and Lively will both be rookies, and it's a mixed bag in terms of expecting rookies to be ready to go right away. It's possible, but you can very rarely rely upon it. So if all goes well, maybe they contribute, right? But the Mavs need to either hope that those new additions are enough to fix their defensive woes, or they need bigger commitments from guys like Luka, Kyrie, Christian Wood, Tim Hardaway Jr. Of course, half of those guys may not be with the team next year, but if they are, they need more of a defensive commitment out of them because the offense was fantastic, but the defense was so bad that the offense didn't really matter. So we'll see who's there and just how much of a commitment they show to the defensive side of the ball. But we sort of talked about Christian Wood a little bit there at the very end. That does lead into point number 3 here. And that question is Christian Wood enough, or do the Mavs need more? And this is kind of a multifaceted question here because it does depend, again, on what Kyrie Irving's doing. If Kyrie Irving re-signs with the Mavericks, then I believe the answer to this question leans a lot more towards the yes category, to them keeping Christian Wood and thinking that that's enough to sort of get by. The team's defensive needs are still a concern, regardless of whether Kyrie or Christian Wood are there, but Wood was able to produce well enough to fit into that third option territory, right? If Kyrie and Luka are the 1 and the 2, Christian Wood could slot nicely into the third option on offense. If Kyrie goes elsewhere, then I think we start looking at the situation a little bit differently. Christian Wood made $14.3 million last season. One would expect that with his recent production, both in Houston and in Dallas, that price tag would go up a little bit, right? Maybe more than a little bit, but at least more than the 14 million and change that he's being paid right now. And I know that some people would look at that sort of situation and expect the scenario to be flipped, right? Saying if Kyrie does come back, wouldn't the Mavs be less inclined to keep Christian Wood, not more inclined? I don't really think that's true, though. If the team has Luka and Kyrie, as I pointed out before, then you're going to be committing a lot of money to them, and you're not going to be able to find another star player to add to that duo without making a major trade. Kyrie's contract, if he is re-signed, is going to eat a lot of your cap space, and you're going to be looking at maybe somewhere in the realm of 20 to 25 million in space before you hit the luxury tax threshold. So they would need to make a major trade to do that. Said trade would likely require the team to give up at least one, potentially more picks, because you're not going to be moving Kyrie or Luka. So that's something I don't think the Mavs are inclined to do, because they already did move some picks to make the previous trade that got them Kyrie Irving. So you kind of want to keep as many of the picks as you possibly can right now. Additionally, a team moving a star player is going to look for salary matching guys and or young talent in return and in addition to those picks. So guys like Christian Wood, guys like Hardaway Jr., Reggie Bullock, or even younger guys like Josh Green could be given up to make that play happen. So if you're looking for that third player, you would effectively have to move Christian Wood away to do it, which, if you're the Mavs, okay, you're probably fine with that. But from the Christian Wood perspective, it does still end with him not being on the Mavs anymore. So instead, if you have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, and you don't want a third and very expensive superstar, re-signing Wood to something in maybe that 20-ish plus million range would present a cheaper option than going out and chasing another sort of all-star player. And it gives you a guy in Wood who does not need to be in the top 2 on the team in scoring to have an impact, and also would not cost you a significant portion of your rotational depth like a traded player would. Christian Wood can come in there, he can average something like 12 to 15 points a game, maybe get you the rebounds that you need without eating offensive opportunities away from Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. So in that instance, he's perfect. He's the third option on a team who does not need too many plays called for him specifically. Without Kyrie Irving, then the team goes out and looks for a clear number 2 option, a guy who can take more of that scoring load onto his shoulders. And in that case, I don't know if Christian Wood is the guy they want for that role. So that's why I think that scenario plays out. I think it's more likely that Wood stays in Dallas if Kyrie stays in Dallas than if he leaves. So that could be entirely off base. I do make a lot of assumptions in that sort of scenario that I just outlined, but they could still keep Kyrie and decide they don't want Christian Wood anyway, go for a cheaper option, maybe just play one of the young guys that they either picked up in the draft or traded for on the night of the draft. That's also a potential avenue that the Mavs could take. But if you didn't notice, pretty much every scenario here for the Mavs is dependent on what Kyrie Irving is going to do. He effectively is holding this franchise hostage. Not in a malicious way, but that's what happens when you trade for a guy like Kyrie Irving midway through a season. Now everything about your offseason revolves around him. So there's really no getting around it. But we'll see what Kyrie Irving's decision is, and then obviously once that decision's made, we'll see what the Mavs look to do around it. But let me know what you think. Does Kyrie stay with the Mavericks? Do you think that the guys they picked up in the draft will be enough to address some of their defensive concerns? Do you think Christian Wood is worth bringing back? And what do you think his price point will potentially be? Please feel free to share your thoughts. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.